we need a biomanufacturing cloud. In the same way that Amazon built its digital cloud and enabled the very successful companies the last 15 years to flourish, in the same way, we need some sort of a biomanufacturing cloud that would allow companies to accelerate their path towards profitable production.
Hey, Carl, how's it going?
What's up? I thought I would kick it off by saying happy birthday to Dom.
Oh, yeah, my little baby is now 3 years old.
That's amazing.
Quite the young man. And so we've been busy, so celebrating. We had his party at Chuck E. Cheese. I mean, that was a big part of my childhood. So it was fun to take him for his birthday and be on the other side as a parent. And it was a good time. It was a great time.
You know what? They've been around forever because when I was in college, we used to go there to play video games.
Yeah. And the guy who started Atari or was one of the founding members created Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah, exactly.
Atari was in the arcade game console space. They were also in that space. And then the guy was like, let's just make a family-friendly arcade with a big mouse named Chuck E. Cheese and his friends. And they did animatronics, which was crazy. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. Your birthday's also coming up. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Any big plans?
No big plans. I will be in California for my birthday, but then I'm going to fly back to New York. So I'm going to be celebrating with my parents and my sister and hopefully two of my sons, because two of them will be out there. That's the big plan. Celebrate with the family and then come back to celebrate with the family.
Nice. Yeah. And you've been having fun with your family already. You've been gallivanting around Manhattan, hitting up the MoMA.
Yeah, Kristen had wanted me to see Life Cycles, which is an exhibit on the first floor of the Museum of Modern Art that explores the materials of contemporary design. So this is very topical to what we talk about here on Grow Everything. For example, there was a t-shirt made with cultivated collagen from Modern Meadow. And previously we've had Suzanne Lee of Biofabricate on the pod. And she is the designer of that. She and Amy Cogman, who now lives in the UK. There were some pieces by Neri Oxman there. I was more obsessing over the plastic being printed with a 3D printer, plastic waste. I ended up talking to our friend Aaron Nesser about the availability of plastic waste. And apparently there's a lot of it out there. And you can buy it in some of these 3D printers. You can throw the plastic waste in there, it'll turn it into a thread and you can print directly. So that was fascinating. And then right next to that gallery is a gallery where an artist chooses pieces from the entire Museum of Modern Art collection and curates a space. The person who curated is a British designer, but there's a piece by an artist named Agnes Martin. The piece is called Friendship, and it's a humongous grid that was created with gold leaf, probably 8 feet by 8 feet or something like that. And it was really interesting to stand in front of that. And then completely on the opposite side of it were these giant horns that had been made from recycled horns, not horns that you would find on an animal made of keratin, but in musical instrument horns. So if you can imagine a trombone that is, 15 feet tall, that's what was on the other wall. So it's really interesting to see the contrast of those things. So biology and new materials and just pure abstract art on the other side, which I think is important for us to spark the imagination.
Yeah, that did spark your imagination. I'm glad that you're going out there to be inspired, not just from nature, which is very important in biology, but from art as well. Anything really pop out in terms of how it relates to our day-to-day work?
I think sometimes you just don't know what rabbit hole you're going to go down when you look at some of these things. Like I said, I was really surprised to hear how available plastic waste is. E-waste is the fastest growing waste stream in the world. So these are problems that we will solve with biology, among other things. One of the things that it made me really wonder about, and I did a bit of a dive, was just how is synbio or synthetic biology being represented on TikTok? Have you done any deep dives on synbio on TikTok, Iram?
Not on TikTok. I was on TikTok for 2 days. 2 days during the pandemic. I went down a rabbit hole. I was scrolling and 2 hours went by and like, what just happened? And I was like, I don't think I can have this in my life. So I am not on TikTok for that very reason. But what have you been seeing out there?
So I specifically went on TikTok because there is a creator that talks about synthetic biology who I've seen on Twitter, but I could not find her on TikTok, even though I was doing searches for synbio, synthetic biology. I did see John Trembers on there, who we just had on the pod a couple of weeks ago. But what I did find was symbiocritical content, someone who was referring as synthetic biology as the technologicalization of life itself, which is also kind of reactionary. I did found a guy named Dr. Craig, who is a bioengineering PhD and STEM content creator, who seems to deep dive into some pretty challenging subjects. So that was interesting. We talk about it internally at Messaging Lab. There's a lot of room for using these platforms to get more educational content out there. And I don't know if I've mentioned it here, but on Reels, I have seen ads from New England Biolabs selling DNA synthesis services, which I think is really interesting. So our audience is there.
Let's go. Are you saying let's go? Let's take Grow Everything. We're going to go on TikTok. Let's do a dance. We should have a Grow Everything dance. That's what they do on TikTok, right? That's what I assume. Everyone just does a dance.
TikTok is all about people dancing. We were looking for the Synbio dance. Jake Wintermute of Ginkgo Bioworks, where are you?
Yeah. Evangelize this. Do.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of great content. I'm really into the Kurzgesagt. I can't say that. You're German.
Kurzgesagt, so it means short saying or said shortly.
Yeah, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
I'm so into that. So the founder of Kurzgesagt is Philipp Detmer. He actually wrote a book called Immune, which is about the immune system and how it works, but in terms where you can understand. So there's a lot of analogies to battle because then your immune system fights infections. It's opened up my eyes. It's been very illuminating. And today we had a call with a company and we were talking about skin. And I was able to really draw from this book because skin is the first line of defense. He talks about what the structure of skin is. And I think for us, it's like super helpful to hear other science communicators talk about biology because it can help us when we continue that conversation with our clients, but also here on the pod. So I would recommend that book. My friend Sharath gave me that book when I went to Bangalore. He knows I'm a big science nerd. He listens to the pod. He's like, you have to read Immune. I'm reading it. It's great.
Sounds really good. The term that I haven't heard applied to biology that much yet is hyperobject, which is a philosophical term used to describe something that is so complicated that it is something that is hard to comprehend. And biology is a hyperobject. I think, if I'm wrong, please correct me, listeners, in that biology, there's so many moving parts. You're not just dealing with DNA being synthesized and transcribed and RNA being translated into proteins and proteins moving around in a cell. But there's this temporo-spatial component to biology that defies characterization. It's just so incredibly complex. We know so little, and yet we know so much. There's so much to learn. So that's something that I think we should dig into more.
Because you can't really pin down biology, right? It's always moving, it's always evolving and reacting to its environment, even like ourselves as human beings. But it's a very hard thing to have a moment in time and freeze it. It's never frozen. A lot of us, when we go to get a health checkup, we get our blood work taken once or twice a year, maybe, unless you're like Brian Johnson and get it done every day. I don't know what he does. But that's the type of information you need to really get a snapshot is how your biology is evolving and reacting to the food you eat, to the air you breathe, to the water you drink. That, I think, is a very important concept for us to discuss with our audience, but even everyone as we talk about our health. It's not static. It's a very, very dynamic thing. Genetics is just one part of a very complex picture. So I think it's something that we'll continue to talk about as we not only talk about human health and biology, but just leveraging biotechnology. It's a very hard thing to replicate consistently, but depending on what we're talking about. So
as we get into the interview, I think we've said it before, one of our themes for 2024 is biomanufacturing. That is the use of biology to manufacture things. 2 years ago, I was at a conference in London where everybody's saying there's not enough capacity for biomanufacturing. Then that dialogue changed last year and people were saying there's not enough products to fill capacity. There was a lot of capacity that was built during the pandemic to help make the mRNA vaccine, the COVID vaccine, that ended up saving millions of lives. Now we're at a place where there's a lot of products that could be made with biology, but maybe there's not enough products ready to scale for mass production. What do you think about biomanufacturing?
yeah, as we've been digging into it, I'm learning that it's very complex. It's not all created the same. There's different types of biomanufacturing. I think when it comes to the whole capacity versus the demand for biomanufacturing is like the chicken and egg situation. If you build it, will they come? Maybe. But if you have a product that you need to scale, you'll build it. So I don't know how much of an issue it is. And I think it's something that our guest today has very good insights into where biomanufacturing is, what types of instrumentation and setup is required to build these plants, and really thinking of biomanufacturing as an infrastructure similar to data centers. So I'm very excited to have our audience hear more from our guest, Edward Shenderovich, who you know very well. Carl, how did you meet him?
I can't say that I know Edward very well. We both met him at the same time, Iram. We met him last year at C16 Biosciences at a networking event that we co-sponsored with SynBioBeta, and Edward was there. Pretty sure that was the first time we met him, and we've had a few conversations with him. He was on stage at Biofabricate with someone from Boston Consulting Group, and Boston Consulting Group just put out a report, which we'll link to in the notes, on biomanufacturing. So with that, let's let Edward introduce himself and tell us about his company, Synonym. All right. Well, Edward Shenderovich, I hope I said it the right way, of Synonym, we're so happy to have you today on the Grow Everything podcast. One of our themes for 2024 is biomanufacturing. You're at the center of biomanufacturing with your company, Synonym. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you.
I'm super excited to be here.
Thank you. Why don't we get started? You have done a lot in your career. You're a serial entrepreneur. You've started several companies like Notel and Kite. What got you interested in entrepreneurship in the first place?
Well, I think what got me interested in entrepreneurship is that building companies gives you a lot of responsibility, but also gives you a lot of freedom. I think more entrepreneurship in the world leads to more ownership, and ownership in the sense of taking responsibility, leaning in, being cognizant of what's happening, not just going with the flow. I don't think I'm a go with the flow kind of guy.
So people say that being an entrepreneur is a spiritual journey, and it's as much about personal development as it is about the company that you're building. What do you think about that idea?
Oh, you definitely grow. And you grow much faster than if you're not an entrepreneur. You must, because I think ultimately what I learned being an entrepreneur is that you are surrounding yourself with amazing people. The driver of success for you is really surrounding yourself with amazing people, and you're responsible for them. That's not something that you generally feel when you're not the founder of a company. And I think that you become a really good founder when you actually understand that you're responsible for everyone in the company. The buck stops with you, and the success of the company is dependent on your actions and your decisions. It's not only the people that work for you, it's their families. They could be your partners in a sense, but generally they're dependent on your performance and your decisions. So that puts a lot of things into perspective and helps you develop much faster.
I love that. I am an entrepreneur myself. I totally resonate with that. I'm really curious because you've been a serial entrepreneur. You're also an investor. You've been an entrepreneur in different industries, but why did you move into the world of biomanufacturing?
Well, biology is the science of life, and it's incredibly complicated and incredibly exciting and has phenomenal potential. During the pandemic, I spent a lot of time in nature. I actually moved out to Hudson Valley from New York. I ended up observing nature. I became really passionate about climate change. I've observed things that made me feel like climate change is real. And this is something you don't feel living in cities. You read about it, but when you live in the country, you feel that things are different from one season to another. That made me very interested in how biology and biotechnology can help us deal with the effects of climate change. I started investing in companies in biomanufacturing, specifically focused on the future of food. What I realized is that many of these companies don't have capacity to produce. And that's what the CEOs of the companies were telling me, that there's no capacity to produce. I read about this fermentation capacity gap. And at the same time, what I realized is that there's no production level thinking in the design process, that many of the companies are designing something and they're not really thinking of how they will produce. So these two came together into the idea that we need a biomanufacturing cloud. In the same way that Amazon built its digital cloud and enabled the very successful companies of the last 15 years to flourish. In the same way, we need some sort of a biomanufacturing cloud that would allow companies to accelerate their path towards profitable production. That was a combination of factors that got me interested in the space. I probably didn't understand how complicated it is when we ventured into it, and how complicated development is and how complicated biological systems are. But over time, you start learning how to deal with those complications. Initially, it seemed like a wall of impenetrable information. And then that wall turned into a climbing wall of execution. You start seeing holes, and you start understanding that you don't need to actually penetrate the wall, you can climb over it.
It's interesting that you were investing in food startups, and that's where you notice the gap, because the way I understand it is it's a huge gap for food startups, especially if they want to drive prices down. But what was it specifically that you had seen among them that made you go, there's a need for more capacity?
It wasn't me seeing anything. It was me listening to CEOs of some of the leading synbio food companies. They were basically saying, we need to produce at massive scale. We need 400,000 liter, 150,000 liter, 500,000 liter bioreactors. We'll go as large as we can, and that's the way you lower the price. We need to lower the price of our products in order for them to be competitive with existing alternatives made through animal agriculture. That was the key driver. And I was seeing that on different levels. People are saying that they need capacity on the pilot scale and they need more of it. But what I realized after is that it's not that the capacity doesn't exist. There's just a lot of friction in getting to it. And same with demo scale, and same obviously with industrial scale. And on industrial scale, we definitely don't have enough capacity. But we also don't have enough mature science. There's a capacity gap, but at this point, it's a perceived fermentation capacity gap. There's a lot that needs to happen for that gap to become real on the science side, on the engineering side, and also on the offtake side. So the markets need to be as ready as the science, and the capacity to produce needs to reflect the state of the market.
If there are these companies that need more capacity, why would they go to a company to look for that capacity versus fundraising for it and building it on their own? What's the pro and con of those two options, either capital or external?
I think it's a combination of factors. First of all, building large-scale facilities is very difficult. It's complicated from the engineering perspective, from the logistics perspective, from the perspective of development. It requires coordination of hundreds of actors. That's not a skill that these companies have. Building those skills internally is very difficult. They're generally science-focused rather than engineering-focused or development-focused. So that's one side. Secondly, the capital requirements for building these facilities are massive. If you want to build a large-scale biomanufacturing facility, it is hundreds of millions of dollars. Maybe in 21, it was still possible to raise hundreds of millions of dollars and actually build something. In 22, it stopped being possible. And that's led many companies to start thinking of maybe we can actually use third-party capacity. Maybe we can see if there's a way to build those facilities off balance sheet. That really resonates with how more mature, how more developed markets are actually functioning. If you need an office, and as you know, I've built an hotel, so I know a little about offices. You generally don't think about building an office building. Unless you're a company like Google, you can buy an office building or a whole block, as they've done in New York, or another very large company. Buying buildings and not leasing an office is a matter of just managing your treasury. That's not what most companies do. So if you're doing that in office, which is a mature real estate asset class, let's see what you're doing in other classes. Generally, you don't build your data center. There are only a few companies that build their own data centers. There's a huge multi-trillion-dollar data center asset class, which has been developing over the last 30 years. Amazon and Facebook and Netflix and other companies that have large audiences, they're actually leveraging lots of third-party data centers. Similarly, with warehouse logistics, we have companies like Prologis, which is a multi-billion-dollar business that builds third-party logistics infrastructure. That just shows you the maturity of an asset class. Over time, companies that need fermentation capacity will all rely on some form of third-party facilities, especially at large-scale production, because you build one on the balance sheet, and then what do? You've locked several $100 million that you raised into your equity. Your equity investors expect completely different returns than the infrastructure investors. So you need to have a match between the expectations of markets and the match between timelines of equity investment and business cycles and timelines of real estate cycles. I'm a big believer in renting. If we're renting offices or warehouse logistics or data centers, why not rent large-scale fermentation facilities?
Can you help us understand the difference between, and if there's a difference between the fermentation capacity that breweries have versus the biomanufacturing capabilities needed for like the synthetic biology companies that are making milk or egg or other products? What's the difference in manufacturing that you're talking about versus the breweries?
Yeah, you can't really upgrade breweries, although we're still talking about large steel vats. The way they're structured is different. You have completely different utilities requirements. For both biomass and precision fermentation, you need very different amounts of electricity. You need a lot of water to cool the bioreactors. You need wastewater treatment. You also need to be generally within proximity to feedstock that you want to use for it to be economically viable. These facilities will be in different places than the breweries or really even the ethanol facilities, although close. We're generally looking for large-scale fermentation facilities for food and materials and ingredients that will change the way lots of industries operate. We are going through this massive, massive materials transition. In the same way that many companies went through digital transformation over the last 20, 25 years, I think over the next 20, 25 years, many companies that touch to the real world will go through a materials transition. Biology, and specifically fermentation, will be one of the key pathways through which they produce new materials and ingredients. And we just want to be the cloud infrastructure company that enables that.
I love that you are using that analogy of AWS and data centers and bringing it to Synonym and biomanufacturing. I think it helps a lot of people understand the importance of biomanufacturing. Something that you can help us understand too is what scale are we talking about? How many liters capacity is actually one that's probably the best, right? I'm going to go back a little bit because I wanted to preface this because I had gone to InBioBeta and there were a lot of alternative protein companies talking about what is the ideal size of a fermenter, because if it's too big and you have contamination, that's a huge loss. But if it's too small, it's not enough. So what is that ideal size that we're talking about in terms of a biomanufacturing facility?
Well, there are biomanufacturing facilities now that produce vaccines, that produce insulin. Ultimately, Novo Nordisk, which is one of the largest pharma companies, is also one of the largest biomanufacturing companies. They're using the same process of precision fermentation that was pioneered by Genentech in the 80s to make insulin. Before that, insulin was made through animal agriculture. So we're trying to build facilities for production of other types of proteins. So let's say collagen or keratin or beta-lactoglobulin. The size of the reactors really depends on the science and on the market, on how much of that product do you actually need. If you need thousands of tons of product or millions of tons ultimately, which we will need millions of tons of milk proteins if we want to replace or really make a significant dent in the milk market, we will need very large scale bioreactors. With collagen, we may need smaller bioreactors and smaller facilities. With some specialty chemicals applications, we may need even smaller facilities. It also depends on the potency of those products and on the efficiency of the bioprocess. If our yield from a certain bioprocess is large, we need smaller bioreactors. And then there are companies that are looking at completely different approaches where if you have a continuous fermentation approach, maybe you need smaller bioreactors than with batch fermentation. So you're right, contamination is an issue, but it's an issue at all scales. It's an issue that we need to deal with by tackling contamination, not reducing the size of the bioreactors.
Hi, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Messaging Lab, the force multiplier for biotech. Your biotech company is making the world a better place. You know that, we know that. But does the world? There's a big reason why some biotech companies attract investors, sign up customers, and get attention. That reason is strategic communications. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling narratives. And we have done that for the most successful biotech companies across healthcare, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice, visit messaginglab.com to explore how we can elevate your story and grow your business. Right. I think the idea was that in this conversation that was happening at this event, it's in BioBeta, is rather than having a few large tanks, you have more smaller tanks. You can isolate the contamination in one of the tanks versus being a larger volume.
Yeah, potentially. Ultimately, these products need to be economically viable, and they also need to be superior to the existing products. Superior in many different ways. Economically viable is one way to be superior. Maybe they should be cheaper. Maybe they should have different organoleptic qualities. They definitely should be more sustainable. But the only way these byproducts will be adopted is if they are economically viable and superior to the existing alternatives. That's why companies are looking at larger scale facilities and trying to improve science so that there are higher titers and there's higher yield. Ultimately, it's all an efficiency game and it needs to be market driven. We've been talking about this as Synonym, the need for the market overall to start thinking about economics of production at the design phase, when you're actually in the labs and you're choosing the right chassis and the right microorganisms, thinking about what your downstream processing will look like. It's not a post-factum discussion.
And do you think that that limits where we are today when it comes to biomanufacturing production capacity? Do you think not enough companies are thinking about what things look like downstream?
We have talked to hundreds of contract manufacturers. As Synonym, one of the first things we did, we launched this platform called Capacitor. When we launched it, we were able to find about 100 different CMOs or CDMOs around the world. Then it grew over the next year, it grew to about 250 facilities. There aren't many others out there that are not on Capacitor. We have talked to most of them. One of the key problems that they're dealing with is that they're looking for companies that have good science. So their limiting factor is that they get approached by everyone, especially the top CMOs get approached by everyone. They want to be choosy. They want to make sure that that science is sound, that it works. They need to see good tech transfer documents. They're constantly talking companies out of producing now. They feel that they're not ready. And you don't want to go to larger scale bioreactors when you're not ready, because you're just wasting time, both the CDMO time and your own time, and certainly your own money or your investors' money.
Capacitor, as you mentioned, is a biomanufacturing facility database where they're located. What types of other information is on there? Does it have what feedstocks are local? Does it have the wastewater management capabilities? What type of information can someone find on this end Capacitor?
So there are dozens of search and filtering parameters. You can filter by size of the bioreactors, or obviously where the facilities are, what type of downstream processing equipment they have, including wastewater treatment. Not all of the information is perfect there. It's a very intransparent market. We're trying to make it more transparent, but it's also a matter of time. It didn't happen overnight. It took months for us to gather the first set of information, and then we're constantly refining it. We're approaching those CMOs and CDMOs and adding more information to Capacitor. They're approaching us and they want to modify their information as well. There's a drive towards transparency on both sides. It takes time.
A couple of years ago, I was at a meeting where people kept saying there's not enough capacity. And then last year, people started saying it's not that there's not enough capacity, it's that there's not enough products that need the capacity. So where are we actually in that cycle of argument? I'm under the impression we don't have enough of either.
I think what we have is a lot of intransparency and a lot of friction and a lot of distrust in the market. That's why the capacity seekers, the SynBio companies that want access to capacity, are saying that there's not enough. And the CMOs and CDMOs that are in many cases inundated with requests are saying that the science is not good enough and sort of pointing fingers at each other. And they will continue doing that until there is more transparency in the market. And that's actually what we're trying to build. We're trying to make this into a platform where we can help companies Sherpa them from lab to shelf and help them with automating tech transfer and help them with standardizing contracting and standardizing how you can actually compare different facilities. Because right now it's extremely difficult to even get quotes that you can compare from CMOs or CDMOs. Some people quote you on runs, some people quote you on liters per year or liters per month. Some include overhead, some don't, or feedstock or labor. You're always comparing apples and oranges.
We had a conversation recently, you and I, Edward, where you talked about this idea of people charging per liter and where they have a certain price. So basically, every time we run the biomanufacturing facility, we get charged per liter. But you guys had come up with another way that would save either the biomanufacturer or the facility a lot of money.
I think that the market needs products that are charged per kilo. When you're making, let's say, egg proteins and you want to replace existing egg proteins, there's the existing kilo of egg proteins costs something, X, and you want to make sure that when you're approaching your buyer at Kraft or Unilever or P&G, you're telling them that you will be able to match that price or it'll be a little more expensive because it's a better product. You need to compare apples to apples. But from the production perspective, you're utilizing capacity that's measured in liters. The way you transfer these liters into kilos depends on your yield. So when you're approaching a facility and you're saying that you need to get a certain number of kilos of product out, it depends not only on the capacity that they have, but really depends on your science and on the efficiency of the operations. There is a way to translate them, but to translate the available liters of capacity to kilos of product output, but it depends on the science of behind the product and on the engineering and the efficiency of downstream processing.
At Synonym, you also provide tools. And you're talking about scientists, they're figuring that out, but you make it easy for them to think about the economics, right? You have the Techno-Economic analysis tool, you have your life cycle assessment tool, it's called Scalar. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that's helpful in this commercialization part of the bioeconomy?
Absolutely. We're very proud of those tools. We have an amazing team of engineers that started this process by talking to hundreds of companies in the space. And we went on deep dives with dozens of them and did manual techno-economic analysis on dozens of different products. And then we realized that we can actually automate that and create a platform where you simply enter a few numbers and it provides you with rudimentary techno-economic analysis in 30 seconds. And then if you play with the platform for another 15, 20 minutes, you actually get a pretty good document that's comparable to what you would get if you had hired a consultant and paid him tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. When we created that, it was like a ChatGPT moment where all of a sudden you get, wow, this is something that's fully automated and it makes sense directionally. And even from the numbers perspective, it's very, very close to what I've already had somewhere else. And it's a great second opinion. Let's see, we paid something to consultants or we built something internally. Let's see what Scalar says. How close is it? It's a set of tools that we developed to help companies understand economics of production. Not only are we looking at what the project returns would be or bankability, we give companies a certain sensitivity analysis to understand what are the sensitivities in their process and what variables can be tweaked. There are hundreds of parameters that can be tweaked within Scalar. We're exposing many of them. Some are internal and we're figuring out how to best expose them to users, but it's been overwhelmingly successful. Scalar has been used for doing TEAs on thousands of products. And now we've been able to aggregate that data and we've published it in our trends reports. And we will publish more information that we're getting in aggregate from the market on what the returns could be from bioproducts, what is economical to produce right now, and what is not economical, because that's very important. As I said, we're dealing not just with science, but with products that need to hit the market. If someone is in the lab and they're developing science, if it's a university environment, great, that's fine. Maybe it solves scientific or educational purposes. As soon as you start thinking about distributing that product to companies, and ultimately, if you want it to be within consumer products, those products need to hit certain price points. Otherwise, they will not be competitive. What we've learned just historically is that everyone cares about sustainability. There are maybe 60% of consumers say that they want to buy products that are more sustainable. But when it comes to voting with their wallets, it's only 3% of consumers that buy sustainable products. So obviously, we need to get the price right.
Right. Yeah. We'll put that trends report in our show notes. That's one thing. And the question I have is, can you share a user story like of when they did the TEA, they had a go or a no-go decision? It's only going to tell you the data that you put in there, and it's going to either be a good number or a bad number. So any story you can share from a user?
I know that the TAs from Scalar are being included in fundraising data rooms We have venture investors running DD, so they get the data from the companies and then they come to Scalar and input those numbers and see what the TA says. But my favorite story, and I won't name the company, but we were doing a presentation to one of the companies and showing them the Techno-Economic analysis and showing the sensitivities and numbers. And in the middle of the presentation, I get a text from the CEO of the company who is sitting in a Zoom room on the other line. He's texting me and says, "Wow, this is exactly what we're looking for." So that was an amazing moment.
That is amazing.
That really showed me that we're on the right track.
Okay, so you've built these tools to basically track and give companies access to these facilities that already exist, but you're also going to be involved in building new biomanufacturing facilities. Have you built any yet? Where's the first one going to be? What's it look like?
We haven't built any yet. It takes time. We founded Synonym 2 years ago. I actually got an email from LinkedIn today congratulating me for 2 years at Synonym.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. We've done a lot of engineering work. We initially started thinking about larger scale facilities. So 2.4 million liters, 4 million liters, because we listened to the CEOs of synbio food companies, and they were all saying that we need these huge facilities with very large bioreactors. So we started designing for the market. And then looking into Techno-Economic analysis, we really realized that maybe these companies are not there yet. Their ambition is to be there, and maybe they want to be there in 2 years, but it could happen in 5 years. From the underwriting perspective, we need to make sure that there's a high level of certainty that they will be there, because otherwise, project finance investors will not be able to invest. They will not be able to underwrite. We scaled that down and started looking at smaller capacity, and we are now in late stage planning around a facility that we want to build in the Midwest. So that is something that we plan on doing in 24. So we'll break ground in 24, and then we'll look more facilities. It starts with one. The goal for us is to make sure that our engineering is sound and that we're standardizing that capacity. We want to make sure that whatever we build, it has as many standardized components as possible, so these facilities can be multi-purpose. Not only multi-purpose only for food, but also multi-purpose across different verticals. Because that way we can unlock project finance and speak with infrastructure investors about taking these facilities off balance sheets of the companies that would actually use them.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to see the biomanufacturing facility you guys built, because you've learned so much across all of these other existing biomanufacturing facilities. So you know what they have done wrong and you know what they have done right. So you can avoid a lot of those mistakes and pitfalls that they have today. So I think it's going to be very exciting for any company to be part of the Synonym biomanufacturing facility.
I certainly hope so. I think most of the facilities that have been built so far have been built on the balance sheets of companies, because companies were building it for themselves. They're all single-use, single-purpose facilities, generally built for production of a certain product. When a company is thinking about building a facility, obviously they're thinking that they will be successful. They want to aim for that success. So they're optimizing for that specific product. And they're not thinking about reuse of that facility, or not necessarily. And they're also not thinking about optimizing the residual value of that facility. If you're doing this off balance sheet and thinking about multiple users and thinking about the interests of investors, you have completely different motivations, and your engineering approach is different as well. So it's not that anyone has done something wrong. They just did it for a different purpose. And I think over time, that purpose changes. You can still build single purpose facilities, but if you're doing it using your own capital, are you as competitive as someone who will rely on standardized infrastructure? If you're still building your own data centers, are you still as competitive as someone who is relying on Amazon's cloud or Microsoft's or Google's, or just in general on third-party standardized infrastructure? I think the question will be there over time. What makes you more competitive?
So you mentioned that there are different types of biomanufacturing. There's the continuous flow, there's the precision fermentation. What are the top types of biomanufacturing, and do they require different builds? You would have like 4 types of biomanufacturing facilities for those biomanufacturing processes to work.
Yeah, absolutely. There are many different types of biomanufacturing facilities. If we talk about biomanufacturing broadly, I mentioned there are facilities that are pharma grade, and then you have facilities that would be food grade that are producing for human consumption. And then there will be industrial grade fermentation facilities. And then you have something that's focused on precision fermentation or biomass fermentation or gas fermentation. Then you have ethanol facilities, which are also a form of biomanufacturing. You will have facilities that are producing sustainable aviation fuel or SAF. All of these are designed differently. Sologen is making it with their Bioforge is also a type of biomanufacturing facility. So there will be different kinds and different types, and then they're not all reusable, definitely not. But what we're tackling is what we believe is a large portion of the market, which is aerobic aseptic fermentation, specifically focused on precision or biomass fermentation. And we believe that's the lowest hanging fruit. That's something that has a wide range of applicabilities. The upstream fermentation and the utilities around it are quite costly. You can standardize around costs. So you build a facility which has the right electricity and water and all the wastewater treatment that you need. All the upstream fermentation can be standardized as well. On Scalar, and you asked me to share some of the data, I'm not sure whether that's in the trends report, but across several hundred protein runs on Scalar, we've been able to standardize our facilities to be about 90% reusable from the cost perspective. We feel that's very powerful because we can talk to project finance investors and say there's a very high chance that if one occupier of that facility fails for one reason or another, then there will be lots of others, hundreds of others. That's the way the data centers work. The reason data centers can be financed by third-party investors is that because that infrastructure is reusable. And that reusability, that ability for the facilities to be multi-purpose is very important for them to be this emerging asset class and to really unlock the capital and significantly lower the cost of production. Because ultimately, it's not just the size that matters. It's also the cost of capital. You have really three drivers. It's CapEx, OpEx, and the cost of capital that will determine what your cost of production is. And of course, the efficiency of your science.
It brings up a couple of things because I'm curious, Edward, is it possible for you guys to buy existing infrastructure and repurpose it for anaerobic aseptic fermentation? And I'm thinking, are there chemical facilities that could be retrofitted into doing that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's possible. We're looking at some of that. We're also looking at some of the studies that have been done on retrofitting these facilities. And we've visited several that we could retrofit. Ultimately, in doing these retrofits, we would need to get them to the same standard as building new ones. We will buy facilities and retrofit them. I have no doubt about that, but there's just not enough in the market. So ultimately, we will need to build more. And we'll need to hone our skills on building more facilities rather than doing the retrofits.
This could be more expensive.
Yeah.
What's the TEA on retrofitting?
Right.
Well, technically, it would only make sense if it's cheaper.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it reminds me, Carl, when you shared an abandoned facility in Canada, and we were like, let's buy that and do something. It was abandoned and it was for sale for like $500,000.
Yeah, it was a protein production facility that was for dairy protein manufacturing. But the other part of it that is interesting, I mean, retrofitting is super interesting. I think about it because you've got multiple $1 trillion of infrastructure that's been built by the oil and chemical industry that we don't want to tear it down. It's just a question of what can we turn it into. But secondly, my understanding, especially on the cultured food side, cultivated meat side, is that there's still a lot of innovation that needs to happen when it comes to manufacturing, because being able to manufacture tons of beef from beef cells is still something we've not done yet. So there is going to be a need for a lot of that innovation to happen on the biomanufacturing side, that in addition to you building these facilities. Is that correct?
You may have noticed I haven't mentioned cultivation once. It's a completely different space. The requirements are very different. Techno-Economics are very different. And from all the Techno-Economic analysis I've seen, we're not there yet, not even close. We may be 99% there from where we were 10 years ago when the first cultivated burger was made. But that cultivated burger costs $250,000. Now, 99%, we're 99% cheaper, maybe 99.9% cheaper, and that would still be $250. So these burgers are still a little more expensive. And I think there's a lot of customer education that needs to be done. In general, on byproducts, and cultivated food products are just one example. I think we need massive education of consumers and politicians and large companies on what these byproducts are and why are they better and how they will change people's lives. We've been working on AI for 2 decades, and only the launch of ChatGPT showed the world that what the promise of AI is. Everyone's eyes open and say, wow, this is amazing. But AI has been used in air traffic control and in autonomous vehicles and in many, many other applications, even in the way our ads are being served or in the way Zoom works or Zoom transcriptions work. It's been used for years. We've had some rudimentary AI for decades. We haven't had that ChatGPT moment in bioproducts yet. And we need that. We need consumers to say, oh, wow, I put this cream with this bioproduced collagen in my hands and it's a completely different experience. Or this new fabric from which my shirt is made is both cooling and heating. I've never felt like that in a piece of clothing. We need those moments. We need the wow moments for consumers. And before that, we'll need a lot of other types of education.
Yeah, you didn't mention cultivation, but that's where I see a lot of pushback where people are still saying, is this going to be fake meat? And they haven't had the education to understand that it could be better. The environmental impact is completely lessened, and the form factors could be different and more interesting than what we're used to these days. So I completely agree with you. There's a lot of education that we need to do. What about on the environmental impact side of biomanufacturing? What does Synonym see its impact on the environment?
So Aaron mentioned that Scalar has a TEA tool, and it also has an LCA component, the life cycle assessment. We've done life cycle assessments for hundreds of products. People have run LCAs on hundreds of products through Scalar. We're seeing that they are better, not only from the carbon perspective, but also from the water usage perspective and other sustainability metrics. Carbon is not the only driver of success. It's the driver of success in energy usage, but maybe our sustainability metrics should be a little different in materials. But LCA is still very important. Bioproducts should be more sustainable. If you look at all the LCAs that have been done on milk proteins or egg proteins, they're completely different than what the existing animal agricultural alternatives are. From the water usage and land usage, they're much better for the environment. There's no question that bioplastics are better than plastics for the environment. They're biodegradable. There are no microplastics issues. They can be water soluble within 60 days. So once again, we need the markets to be educated about this. Otherwise, if they're not more sustainable, why do them? Why do it? No one wants to make things that are less sustainable and bad for the environment. Biology is too complicated to tackle it, to make things that are worse for the environment.
Our friend Aaron Nesser, who's fairly into the biomaterial space, he had posted on LinkedIn that bioplastic does not equal biodegradable, does not equal compostable, because there was this article that there was a bunch of bioplastic straws that didn't biodegrade, and it was 2 years later after it was disposed of. So I'm just pointing out that I guess the other flip side of the argument of biology is that, okay, we have to look at the full cycle. I don't think they used your tool to do an LCA on their bioplastic straws. So I think he'd be happy that I mentioned it on the pod, but it is something to consider. Not everything's equal.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, biology is complicated. I think everyone requires a lot more education. For most people, their biology education stopped with high school biology. Could have been one course, could have been maybe 2 semesters of biology. Some people have taken biology in college, but not everyone. It's not required, or ecology is not required. That is something that we really need to remedy as a society. It is the science of life. And we can learn so much about us and about the way humans interact from biology, how to build organizations, even how to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So looking ahead, Edward, what trends or advancements do you see in the field of biomanufacturing, and how does Synonym plan to stay ahead of those developments?
So there's been a lot of talk about new types of bioreactors. There are many different designs. One of the things that happens within a bioreactor is that microorganisms need to be agitated to actually consume sugar. They're generally lazy. In most of the bioreactors, there's a rotor that rotates at, maybe 60 to 100 RPMs. That requires a lot of electricity. Not everything can be made when the rotor is rotating at such speeds. So there are companies looking at doing agitation or contamination control with sound or light, or making more efficient bubble column reactors. There's a lot that's happening on the continuous fermentation front. There's a company called Power Bio, which shows great promise and has a different bioreactor design. or a completely different approach. And they're also tackling contamination issues. And I know a lot about them because I'm a small investor in the company. So I think there's a lot that will be happening on the efficiency of feedstock, but ultimately we need to have the right expectations with respect to our science and microorganisms that are being used. There must be the most efficient way of making milk proteins using synthetic biology. Right now, we're using approaches with algae and bacteria and yeast and different types of fungi. It can't be that they're all equally good. There must be one that will win, and we're not there yet. I think there will be some form of reckoning, maybe, or some discoveries. I think that AI holds a lot of promise in SynBio, where we can leverage these massive amounts of data to get to decisions faster.
Are you leveraging AI right now, and how?
We're leveraging AI, but only indirectly. There's not enough data that we can see. There's not enough data in scalar or capacitor. There's some bioreactor level data that could be leveraged, but the improvements, efficiencies you can get are still marginal. I think there's a lot of AI that's being leveraged on the discovery side and optimization, the optimization of bioprocesses. We will get to leveraging AI in production. I'm certainly thinking about this in the way facilities will be organized and operated. Ultimately, they should be very efficient from the operations perspective. They're closed loops. There's no reason why AI will not be able to roboticize a lot of these facilities.
Now you're talking. I like that idea of not even having to go into obviously there will be some people there to maybe bring the feedstock to the robot and the robot does everything. But if you can do any remote biomanufacturing, that's awesome. Okay, now we're towards the end of our interview, and you've already started talking a little bit more about the future trends and your predictions. But one thing Carl and I always like to talk about is distributed manufacturing and also the miniaturization of biomanufacturing so we can make things in our house.
I would love that. So when we started Synonym, we talked a lot about cultivation. And of course, I imagine this microwave-sized device that you can use to cultivate something very quickly. Certainly, I would be afraid of having something be cultivated in a matter of minutes. Maybe you can grow dinner for like a Sunday roast in a matter of a week. So every Sunday you have something like a cultivated roast in your little microwave-sized device. I think we're very far from that, maybe decades. And I don't even know whether that's necessary.
Yeah.
Listen, many of us have miniature fermentation devices at home. You can make kombucha. There's so many people that are brewing their own beer at home or making cider. We're already biomanufacturing. Our kitchens are little biomanufacturing factories.
Yeah. Or like medicine, small volume biomanufacturing, medicines, like cosmetics, things that you just need a little bit of. And you can just be like, okay, I need a little bit more of this cosmetic, or I'm not feeling well. This is all the data about my body and what's going on. Can you, whip something up for me?
Yeah, I think these devices will need to be super efficient and super safe. You don't want mistakes.
Yeah. I see a lot of it being more neighborhood sized, serving, 10 or 20,000 people versus for some things, it just doesn't make sense to do it, like you said, individually. I love the idea of a roast growing in my kitchen every week, but I like the idea better of going outside and knowing that I can go to this restaurant and eat beef from 1913, and I can go to that restaurant and it's pork from, Japan, without having to import the pig from that far.
Yeah, I think over time, we will eat meat in the same way that we eat caviar. It will be a luxury product, and it will be an experience that we'll talk about with others. Well, maybe we'll have vintages of it. This has been aged for so many months, and it's cultivated and aged or cultivated. It's a mix of pork and beef, different pork and beef cells, or these are beef proteins with pork fat, and these products will be technically absolutely vegan.
Yeah, exactly.
It has to be. That's what we'll say on the bioreactors, vegan. And they have to have that label on there. And I'm sure you'll help us get there when you're getting all the data from all of the biomanufacturing plants, wrap the AI around all that data and help us figure out how to miniaturize. I feel like Synonym is positioned hopefully to help us get there faster. You'll be the ChatGPT moment of biomanufacturing.
I definitely hope so. And we'll try to get there as fast as possible and be as efficient as possible. It's not a straight road. As I said, biology is complicated, development is complicated, but we're not afraid of doing the hard stuff.
I love that. Spoken like a true entrepreneur.
I think you get great rewards from tackling hard problems.
Wow. So impressive what Edward and Synonym and the team over there, what they're doing. Carl, what do you think of this interview?
I'm fascinated by what Edward had to say. I mean, we know we can use more capacity. I just saw a tweet a few days ago. I haven't been spending a lot of time on Twitter, but I did see a tweet that made the comparison of the carbon output of, I don't know, a flock of cows versus a biomanufacturing center that was producing cultivated meat. There is no center yet producing cultivated meat because it's still quite expensive. It was very clear that a circular facility could produce meat at a much lower carbon cost than cows can. This isn't to say we should eliminate all cows. I don't agree with that at all. But I think that we really need every solution everywhere all at once. And biomanufacturing is one of those solutions.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the different types of biomanufacturing and how they are related to different types of products. You mentioned cultivated meat. What is the ideal biomanufacturing plant to lower the costs of production versus optimizing, increasing the yield? What does that look like? And then can that be a model for all cultivated meats? Or how do we scale this up in a way that is easier for food designers versus saying that for cultivated meat to just tap into an existing infrastructure and make the product versus having to invest so much in setting up that biomanufacturing plant? Sounds like that's the idea behind Synonym, is really making sure that, hey, we're the AWS, we're creating the infrastructure for you to get started building your software. Don't worry about it. I think it's a smart move. And it sounds like requires quite an investment that Edward and his team are making when it comes to creating that map. And hopefully soon they'll start making some of these biomanufacturing plants.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to grow everything, we need these facilities. So I'm very excited to see how they progress. But what do you think about this idea of biomanufacturing facilities as data centers? That's something that Edward says. I've always thought that was a really interesting analogy.
Yeah, the association of biotech to information tech is strong. We use it a lot. I think oftentimes because of course, we have DNA, the ATCG, similar to the binary codes of zeros and ones, and that being a foundation for programming life or programming computer programs. So I think that this is another one of those. He mentioned data centers as an asset class. Would love to hear your thoughts about that. I think data centers being an actual building, yes, it makes sense. To what level is it an asset class? So are the actual servers and the equipment that's inside the data centers, is that included in the value, or is it just the space? I mean, I would love to have dug in deeper with Edward, which we can talk to him offline. But what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I did a little bit of research before we got on the pod with Edward, just to kind of understand that better. And investors do look at data centers as an asset class. And they actually started talking about this back in 2010. Today, there are about 10,000 data centers globally. I did even more digging and learned that McKinsey issued a report, which we'll link to in the show notes, that said that in 2021, there were over 200 data center deals. Those deals are in the billions of dollars. So clearly, this is an asset that is worth lots and lots of money. And so if you could imagine doing the same thing for biomanufacturing and having facilities all over the world that are able to produce biomaterials, foods, anything that we produce with chemicals, but using biology instead, I think it's a net positive for the planet. And also, it's going to be necessary to help really drive costs down.
I guess my question, and again, when you talk to more people about this, or if you came across this in your research, does the value of data centers increase over time? Because for me, it's like hard to imagine, because I feel like technology, just like cars, as soon as you take it off the lot, it decreases in value because technology is advancing. But is it because of the materials that the computer chips are made out of? And what's the equivalent in biomanufacturing?
Yeah, it's a super good question, because I would imagine that the data center as an asset is the building, the land, and the computers that are in there. But if you think about it, those computers have to be swapped out on a regular basis. It's not static. Biology isn't static.
Yeah.
You can't leave the same machinery in there all the time. You have to change them. So I would think that the value is the entire infrastructure. It's not just the building.
Yeah.
But we should dig into it more, and we should come back and have Edward tell us more about it. And you listeners, if you're listening to this and have some insights, please let us know.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that we'll be keeping an eye on we should ask this question since biomanufacturing is something we're focusing on here at Grow Everything. We should talk to our guests about it. What do they think about it? We have a few guests coming up and they need to leverage biomanufacturing to scale up their operations. Are they going to be building it from scratch, or will they talk to Edward of Synonym and leverage existing infrastructure in the beginning? We know our friend Shara at C16, they're using existing infrastructure at the moment as they continue to do different biomanufacturing fermentation runs to make products to prove to their industries that they're selling to that you can make amazing products with the oil that they're manufacturing, which is a trull oil, a replacement for palm oil, which is very problematic. So we should bring Shara on, or her co-founder, David, to talk about their approach to using existing biomanufacturing versus raising capital to build out their own factories.
Yeah, I'd love that. We should get them back on to talk about this. Well, I think that's a pod, unless there's anything else, Iram.
Yeah, the big thing is I'm so excited for SynBio Beta that will be happening in just a couple of months, May 6th through 9th in San Jose, California. And we have a special code for all of our listeners. If you use the code Grow Everything at the checkout for when you register for SynBio Beta, you will receive $300 off. Very generous of John Cumbers and his team to provide that to us and to you. It's definitely worth going to as you're growing more interested in biotech, or you're in the space and want to meet people that are making moves and are learning at a fast pace what's going on behind the scenes when it comes to biotech business. This is a must-go-to event.
We'll be there, so you can come and meet us in person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say if there's one thing we wanted to ask, it's please leave us a review. You go on Spotify, go on Apple. We would love 5 stars. If there's 4 stars, fine. If you want to do 3 stars, just don't. Or maybe do it. I don't know.
All right, I think that's the pod. We'll talk to you guys next time.
All right. See you later. Bye.